bass, beaches, and baits. Aaron, we got it all today, brother.
Yeah, like your monster truck commercial, but unfortunately, or fortunately, probably, we didn't do anything with monster trucks. We just had a good buddy of ours, a real close buddy of yours, and someone I've come to know and respect and like really quickly, Crispin Powley, who's had an illustrious career in the outdoor world and the bass fishing circuit and so on, and just moved over to a company called GSM, which does fishing and hunting stuff. And we talked about all of that. We talked bass fishing, obviously, talked bass conservation, lots of different stuff.
Yeah, a lot of topics and a lot of destination talk, So if you love to fish and you're trying to figure out where to go, we even delve into that a little bit.
And you just couldn't meet a nicer guy. I mean, just someone who is salt of the earth, awesome family man, cares about the resource, conservationist, outdoorsman. I mean, just one of these people who you're like, man, I wish everybody was more like this guy.
Yeah. And he's not outspoken about these things unless you ask him. And if you ask him, be ready, because he's gonna let it roll.
Yeah, and we promise that maybe one of these podcasts coming up here soon won't be about bass or salmon.
I told you I'm about ready to transition to waterfowl. So hopefully before long we'll have someone on to talk about bee pop and some of these things that haven't been able to be looked at for 2 years now. So kind of exciting times there.
Yeah, those are the flown waterfowl counts, the international ones, correct? When you say that bee pop?
Yes, that's a big part of it. There's some on the ground stuff and all too, but right now as we tape today, they are still flying the transects up in Prairie, Canada and the Northwest Territories. So we'll have a good idea of waterfowl over the next month.
First time in a few years. There'll be a lot to dissect there and pull apart. Well, thanks for listening, folks. Check this one out. Crispin Powley, professional bass fisherman and vice president of, I can't remember what he's the vice president of at GSM, but he's over at GSM now. And just a great all-around dude, and you guys will like him. Enjoy. Since 1936, the National Wildlife Federation has worked with hunters and anglers to pass the most important conservation laws in American history, and to protect our sporting traditions. This podcast explores our history, our values, and the work we do to safeguard the fish and wildlife that fuel our passions. We are NWF Outdoors. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the NWF Outdoors podcast. This is your host, Aaron Kindle, with my good buddy, Bill Cooksey. And we have a good guest today, as usual, like we always do. Somebody I had the pleasure of meeting, but we've never had him on the podcast, and he's quite someone in the industry that we ought to talk to. What's happening today, Crispin?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing awesome and having a good time with the start of summer here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. What's happening with you, Big Bill?
Man, heat. I think our heat index here is 113 today. So it's that time of year, man. It's that time of year, but it's all good. Be out at the lake this weekend trying to catch a bass. So all good.
Well, good stuff. I'm glad we have Crispin on. I'm going to let you introduce him.
Yeah. Crispin and I have known each other probably 20 years or so now. I was always in the hunting industry and Crispin was in the fishing industry, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But we had some overlap because the company he was with, Strike King, we did some television shows together, and then Crispin also pro staff for us at Avery Outdoors. So we spent a lot of time in the outdoors together doing photo shoots and that sort of thing, working with outdoor writers and video folks. But Crispin, he's from up on Kentucky Lake. He's a friend of mine from back home, and he is managed pro staffs. He has been, a television star in the fishing world. He's a tournament guy. And now, he's moved into a role as vice president of fishing for GSM Outdoors. I think I got that right. Crispin, thanks for being here today, man.
Oh, my pleasure, Bill. It's always an honor to get to hang out, and we always usually have a pretty good time in our conversation. So you give me an opportunity to hang out with you, I'm going to take it every chance.
Yeah, we do have some rolling conversations, but hey, let's get started though with one of our traditions, and that's what have you been doing outside? And I know you've been doing plenty.
Yeah, I mean, outside to me means a little bit different today than it ever has. I mean, I know we're friends and we talk, but we also interact on social media. And if you are one of my friends on social media, you see that a whole lot of my outside is spent at a ballpark this time of year. Um, I've got a little boy that just absolutely is in love with the game of baseball. So we spend just an incredible amount of time at the park, and in our yard throwing the ball. I'm actually on a family vacation right now in Navarre, Florida, and every night for an hour we go out and play long toss on the beach. We're going to a batting cage this evening, and that feels like where I've spent most of my time recently outside, which is cool. I mean, you get to hang out. I'm really an outdoorsman in the terms of hunting and fishing, but it's life is about seasons, right? And I'm in a season right now where I'm spending more time at the ballpark. In what I would consider conventional outdoors, getting ready for ICAST. So I'm testing a bunch of products right now. And so I'm spending more time doing that than I am actually, fishing. But I just informed my wife yesterday, we're getting home Friday. We got a baseball scrimmage Saturday, church and Father's Day on Sunday. And then Sunday night, I'm headed to Gunnersville for about 4 days. So looking forward to that.
Oh, I'll bet. I'll bet. Well, I've never been to Gunnersville, so that sounds like fun, Crispin. Aaron, what about you? What have you been up to?
Oh, more of the same. I've been out with my kids a lot, just, wandering around the woods, looking at some elk country, seeing if we can find any sheds. We found a couple good ones this year, but I also went this last weekend to Montana, and we did a non-lead ammo demonstration with a couple of different scientists at a rod and gun club there, shooting ballistics gels and water jugs and showing people how lead ammunition spreads out in animals and what that can mean for scavengers like eagles. Both of the scientists I was with are eagle bird biologists, and there's been some real interesting findings in the last little bit about how many eagles, most of the eagles across the whole country have elevated levels of lead in their blood. And it can mostly be attributed to scavenging gut piles. And so we went to a ranch that has a non-lead program. We did a demonstration at a shooting range. And so that was really fun, really exciting. Got a write-up in the paper, in the Bozeman paper. So good stuff, good things to help hunters be able to make good choices if they want to go to non-lead ammunition, which we're encouraging folks to do while they're in the field. Obviously, when you're on the range, there's not that vector with wildlife, so it's not that big of a deal. But when you're out there and you're going to leave a gut pile and things like that, we're just encouraging folks to consider alternatives to lead. So that was a good time.
Well, that sounds good, and I'm interested in seeing more about it. As a shotgun guy who just shoots a couple of deer, every year or so, I don't know much about rifle bullets, so it's interesting to learn more about these non-toxic alternatives. And hopefully the ammo companies will start getting caught up again by this fall, where we really can go out and have some choices in what we buy.
We're starting to see it. Yeah, we're getting some choices. I'm glad to see it coming back.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we'll even get some prices down. That'd be fun too. Well, let's turn back to Crispin here, and I want to start with you growing up, Crispin, because not necessarily the typical prototypical outdoor kid, but tell us about that, where you're from and kind of your upbringing, because it was I hate to say a little different because it was great, but it wasn't necessarily just always hunting and fishing with Dad.
No, it wasn't. It's kind of I get this a lot, that it surprises people because I'm so avid, in every area of the outdoors, but I grew up in a home where no one hunted or fished, not a single day. We didn't own a gun. My parents didn't own a rod and reel. I grew up, kind of. We lived in rural West Tennessee, but just wasn't the background that my mother or father had. And, thankfully, I had some people in my life. I had my dad's sister married a man that the older I get and the more time I spend with my kids in the outdoors, I have a greater appreciation for what he did for me, because it can be trying for sure. And he didn't have to. I wasn't his kid, right? And he took me hunting and fishing. That was back when we had quail, a good quail population, and we squirrel hunted and quail hunted, and he, took me deer hunting, and I was fishing bass tournaments with him when I was probably 10, 11 years old. And through access that he gave me, and then, friends that I grew up with and played ball with and stuff, I would stay the night at their house and, well, let's go fishing tomorrow with the family. And, man, it just really lit something inside of me that is hard to explain, because you wouldn't think it was just there, right? Because there was no reason for it to have ever been planted there, but it was there. And they gave me kind of a way to unlock it and access it and foster it. And quite honestly, through my teenage years, I mean, I played sports, I rodeoed. I think I've told you a little bit about that in the past. But the one constant was I always fished and I hunted every opportunity I had. And to the point where I got really serious about competitive bass fishing in my later teenage, early 20s, and managed to turn that into a career. And I've never, since age about, I guess, 24, I've never not, I've made every dime I've made in the outdoor industry.
But how did that even get started? Because, I have people all the time, how do you get into this? How do you get into the outdoor world? So tell us about that.
Yeah. So I had I was fishing tournaments and guiding and just trying to do what I could to spend the most time I could on the water. Whatever would afford me to spend time in a boat was kind of how I was paying my bills and making my living. I was actually also helping run a youth mentoring program that was called A Sporting Chance. It was in Henry County in Paris, Tennessee, where I was raised. The local judge there at the time ran that through kind of the juvenile court system. And it was basically aimed at giving kids somewhat raised like I was a sporting chance, right? An opportunity to experience the outdoors.
Sure.
So I'm doing that. I'm working in that program. I'm guiding, I'm fishing tournaments, and I guess you could say the stars lined up, or, I believe kind of differently than that. But all in all, in the end, I owned a Stratus bass boat at the time, and they had an owner's tournament trail that was only for Stratus boat owners. And I went to a couple of them that year and did really well. It was a team event. I was fishing with a guy named Luke Mulraney, and we had a really good couple years together fishing team tournaments. And we went to the World Championship. They called the Stratus Owners World Championship, and they hosted it on Old Hickory there in Nashville or Gallatin. And I came in second by like an ounce, and first place was $100,000.
Wow.
And we came in second by like an ounce. And I'll be honest with you, it may be too much information, but they announced us the actual winners when we weighed in, and then came back and told us that we didn't win.
Brutal.
And, it was gut-wrenching. And to the point where I literally vomited. Not figuratively. I literally walked around the corner and vomited because my nerves just did a complete somersault. And
That's good.
But they had the awards ceremony that night. We won a boat and some money, and we had a real good year together. And we got up on the stage and basically, I've never kind of had an issue talking to people and expressing myself. It's a gift that I feel like God's given me to do. And I got up there that night and just said, hey, you know what? I said, you all know what just happened to me. I just literally was told we won, and then, told we didn't. And I said, but in light of all that, I want to thank Stratus for making this possible and at least giving me the opportunity. And I was very genuine and meant it. And about 3 days later, I got a phone call from Teresa Johnson, who I love to this day. I still tell her every time I see her at industry events that I hug her neck and tell her, she's the one that made my entrance into the outdoor industry possible. But she called me and she goes, "I want to hire you." And I said, "Well, for what?" And she said, "I need a young man that understands fishing, that speaks the language, that is a true end user, to come to work for us in marketing and try to help me convey our message to you, to your people, to your demographic." And so the rest was history. I went to work for Stratus. I moved to Middle Tennessee and lived there for 5 years, and got towards about 07, 08, the economy was pretty obvious where it was headed.
Right.
Bass boat sales were going to get tough, and I ended up getting an opportunity to go to work for Strike King then, and left there, left Stratus after 4 or 5 years and went to Strike King. And I would tell you that it was the greatest experience of my life from a professional standpoint, to work with that group of people through that time of growth for that brand. And that chapter came to an end back in November when I left there and went to work for GSM.
Yeah, Crispin, I remember those days watching Strike King, and I was privileged to go to a lot of events with y'all, both at Avery and then when I was with the magazine. So it was a real family atmosphere. But talk some about what you did there, because you held several different titles and working with, the Kevin Van Dams and all of the world. I mean, you were working with famous people.
Yeah, so if you're a kid that grew up in the bass fishing world and that was your thing, I was in heaven. I hired on initially as like a dealer sales manager or something. And the funny story is Doug Miner, who, I call that guy, he's the closest thing I've got to a father, one of the greatest mentors I'll ever have. My first day on the job, he hired me and I met him in Vegas for ICAST. And I'd only met him in person one time prior to that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tell this story. So Doug had called me a couple times and offered me the job. He was certainly feeling me out and wanted us to talk about the job opportunity he had. I won't go as far as to say he offered me the job, but and I kind of kept blowing him off because I was pretty young and I had moved into what I thought was a pretty high role and at Stratus. And I'm one of those people. I have a hard time when I get invested in something. I have a hard time imagining walking away from it. And so he offered me the opportunity to meet up with him, I guess, for an impromptu interview or whatever you want to call it. And finally, he said, "Look, meet me for lunch. Let's meet face to face. You tell me no in person and I'm done."
That sounds like Doug.
Oh, 100%. And so I met Doug for lunch at a Shoney's, and we talked for 10 minutes, and I told him, I'll come to work for you. It took me 10 minutes of talking to that man to know that I wanted to work with him. And the funniest part of the story is, I don't know if I've ever told you this, I told him, I said, "Well, here's the deal I'll make you. I'll take the job if I can be off during duck season." And he looked at me and he said, "Off?" And I said, "OFF, as in off." And he said, "Son," he said, "you've never even asked me what the job pays." And I said, "If you tell me no to this, don't even tell me what it pays because I'm not interested." And Doug being Doug, he sat there for a minute. If you know him, he kind of stroked his beard and he looked me up and down and he goes, "I'm going to take a chance on you." He said, "This will never be in writing." And I said, "Deal." I said, "A handshake from you, I believe, is good enough." And so we did. I put in my notice at Stratus, came to Strike King. And so fast forward, I meet him the next time in Vegas at ICAST, which is our industry trade show. It's the grand poobah, the end-all be-all in the fishing world, where you unveil all your new products and all the media's there and the buyers, retailers are there. he walks up to me and I shake his hand and I'm smiling, and he hands me an atlas. If you remember what that is, I don't think they even make them anymore. But if you recall how an atlas worked, when you opened it, inside the cover, there was a map of the United States, and then it went state by state in the pages. He opens it up to the United States and hands it to me, and he goes, "That's yours to make right." He goes, "Get to work," and walked off. Like, did not tell me how to do my job, didn't tell me what my job was. He wanted me to find my way, and he didn't want me to do it his way. He wanted me to do it the right way. And so out of the gate, my role was dealer sales. So I spent probably 2 years just tearing the highways up, going to every mom and pop tackle shop. I'm talking about I went to every single state in about a 2.5, 3 year period. And, marinas, little country stores to, Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's and academies and so forth. And so I did that for a few years, and then he moved me into managing the sales staff. We used a rep agency or outside sales staff, so we could cover more dirt calling on customers. And I did that for several years. And then I moved into a role of national sales director. And all along, my passion was really in product development and designing fishing lures and designing colors and things of that nature. I had done that a lot as a kid. I'd built lures my whole, ever since I got into fishing, I wanted to build lures. And throughout the course of my, 17 years at Strike King, 16, 17, something like that, I ended up in my favorite role was director of product development, where, basically I worked hand in hand with our pro staff and designers and, guys that would call us and go, "Hey, I've got this great idea," and spent a lot of time with our factories, and in the United States and Costa Rica and in China, working on product development and processes and just honestly, no matter what I ever do in the fishing industry, my passion will always be developing new baits that catch fish.
Crispin, man, you got kind of an illustrious career. You don't look like you're old enough to do all of this. How old are you? Do you mind saying?
I'll be 45 this month. It is as my dad told me once, it's not the years, it's the miles, right? So I've just, I don't know. I've heard that statement a few times, and you're just hearing that part of my story. I could keep you for hours telling you about the phase of life where I rode bulls for a living for a number of years, and tried to make a living in the rodeo world, but thankfully I've settled into this. It sure hurts a lot less in the mornings.
Well, nobody actually makes a living in the rodeo world, Crispin. You know that. They're there for just a little bit and off and on, and they get hurt, and then it's over. Yeah. I mean, right? Isn't that true?
That's exactly my story. And but it sure was fun to make a run at it when I was young and bounced a lot better than I do today.
Yeah. Well, let's transition a little to GSM and tell us about what you moved over there to do. And for folks who don't know, like me, tell us what the GSM acronym is.
Yeah, so GSM stands for Good Sportsman's Marketing, and essentially it is it's a company out of Irving, Texas, part of the DFW Metroplex, and we today I think own 54 brands in the hunting, shooting, fishing space. I knew who GSM was prior to obviously coming to work for them. Just because I'm a very avid outdoorsman in the hunting side, and they own a lot of, Walker's Game Ear and Stealth Cam and Muddy Blinds and just a lot of, Birchwood Casey, just some really strong brands in the hunting shooting space. And basically got a phone call last fall saying, "Hey, we've decided we're going to make an initiative to get into to get into fishing. We believe that it lines up with our values and with our core consumer, and there's a lot of crossover and synergy there. And, just want to talk to you about, we need somebody to head up that division. And, like I said earlier, I'm one of those people, when I get invested in something, it's, the thought of walking away from it's really hard for me. I'm terrible in the stock market, right? Because I seem to want to hold on to things longer than I should. But, after really understanding what their vision and direction initiative was on the fishing side, and, just kind of analyzing where I was in my career, and as it related to kind of the structure that at Strike King, which at the time was owned, or still is, it had gone through 2 sales from private ownership, to private equity in my time there. It just felt like the right thing to do. I've really had a lot of peace about it, and made the move to come over there as vice president of the fishing division, and basically have the opportunity to grow the fishing side of the business from nothing to whatever we determine that it should be. And one of the cool things, and Cooksey touched on this a minute ago, like, I got to live through what I think was the best era of the success of any privately owned company in the history of the fishing business. And that was, the family dynamic and the way we did business at Strike King. And not to say that it's not that way over there today, because there's some great people who work at Strike King. Some people I when I say I love them, I mean it. I don't understate that. Like, I
Sure.
love the people over there. But, as with everything in life, with time comes change. And it had changed. And I just saw an opportunity to start at ground zero from scratch and build a team the way that I had experienced it being the most successful. And they've really given me a lot of leash to do that. I've managed to make a couple hires. I came in and was the only fishing employee for about 5 or 6 months. And in the last couple months, we've hired 3 people that, I could, if I could have handpicked them, that's who I would have picked. I did handpick them, and it is exactly who I wanted. So
Wow.
it's a really fun time. We've, to kind of bring you up to where we are, our initial foray into fishing was we purchased Gary Yamamoto custom baits, a wildly popular brand started on the West Coast by Gary Yamamoto back in the late 70s, early 80s, has a cult-like following. They make soft plastic baits. They are the
Soft plastics.
yeah, and such a unique brand in the way that they do things, as opposed to the way most people pour plastic. And I've been pretty privy to that in my past. But it's a super cool brand. It's always been considered somewhat of a custom-ish commercial brand, and very premium, and just a lot of fun. And it's, in my opinion, it is a wonderful brand to come out of the gate with. We make a product called the Senko, which is arguably in my lifetime the most copied soft plastic bait ever. And it's one of those cool baits where there's a few of them in the marketplace where no matter whose it is, if it's a salt stick bait, they call it a Senko, right? And then, So we followed that up with the purchase of Bill Lewis rather recently, probably less than 2 months ago. And they're very similar. Bill Lewis is a iconic brand as well, primarily for the rattle trap, right? The lipless crankbait.
Right.
And there again, one of the most copied baits of my lifetime. So we have these two, iconic brands with these two foundational products. Everybody's lipless bait. I don't care. When I was at Strike King, I still had to stop myself from calling a red eye shad a trap, right? Like it's
Exactly.
just kind of the industry standard. So that's the two that we own today, and that's the two that we're running and putting a lot of renewed focus in, kind of taking them from where they've been to where we believe they can go. I can tell you this without going into great detail. We've got two other brands bought that will, I've been on calls all morning. Actually, we'll put the pen to paper on them July 1, and we'll make that public then. But two more awesome brands that I'm super excited about getting my hands on and letting our team run with. And so, we're just kind of going at this where, there's some really good brands out there that, it's kind of the way of America, right? Yeah, they've got so much capital to work with. Maybe the ownership has run it and it's been their life's work, but they're getting towards the end and they want to enjoy and ride off into the sunset, but they don't want to see the brand die, right? And
Right.
and we, we get phone calls and emails every week of, hey, I'd like to sell my brand. But not every one of them fits what we're looking for. Yamamoto does. Bill Lewis does. These other that you'll hear about soon enough do. And there's some more out there that I've reached out to and said, hey, look, I really love the way you've done things. Want to pay you the most respect I possibly can. If you ever decide that you want to go a different direction, yeah, I really would love the opportunity to see what we could do with what you built. And it's really, in my mind, a compliment to the current owner, that you've done things right and you've got this thing headed in the right direction. I'm not arrogant enough to think that we can do everything better than the people who had the vision, but I do believe that we've got the resources and the team and the knowledge and the experience to drive these brands the right way. In a time where a lot of people go buy a brand and just ride it till it dies, and we're just adamant.
Right. We're seeing way too much of that in the outdoor space
and I'm
right now.
I'm only in my mid 40s, but I consider myself still a bit old school when it comes to fishing. I threw a Mr. Twister and a jelly worm and I grew up before bass fishing, in my opinion, really exploded with technology. And I still have a lot of respect and hold very high regard for a lot of these old brands that it's just not fair to them to buy them and just ride their name until you just deplete them. And it kind of hurts me to see that happen. And we're not going to do that. So.
And that stuff still catches fish, those
Absolutely.
old baits. I'll pull some out of my dad's tackle box every now and then, and they still catch fish.
Yeah, I've got an old lure, Bill, that I'll never talk about that I catch a lot of fish on when it really counts, that hadn't been made in probably 30 years. So.
Wow. Well, we keep talking bass, and we're going to talk bass a lot more, but, I know, especially with Bill Lewis, they had some forays now into the saltwater world and making some inroads there. Is that something y'all are looking at as well, expanding the species you're after?
Yeah, absolutely. We're going, I don't mind telling you, one of the things I think I've had the opportunity to do by spending so much time in the retail world, traveling and going and seeing dealers and working with big box accounts down to independents, is you got to kind of understand what you see every day living where we do is not the total overall big picture, and it's super easy for me to focus on bass fishing, specifically like deep crankbaits and offshore stuff, the stuff that I'm really excited about and, kind of my forte.
Sure.
Truth of the matter is there's a lot more people that panfish. There's a lot more people that, I'm, like I told you, I'm with my family at the beach this week, and I've got a buddy that's taking me. We're going trout and red fishing tomorrow. And there's more licenses sold in Florida than anywhere else. Right. And they're not fishing in freshwater. So we're going to certainly look at diversifying into some other markets outside of bass. And Bill Lewis has done that. Like you said, I get a lot of emails from from people now that, since we've taken ownership of the brand, that, tell me about how successful they are fishing for bull reds with the big rattle trap, and things of that nature. Walleye fishermen, I hear from them, they're walleye fishing with rattle traps and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, I think the natural evolution and a way to really grow incrementally is to diversify into some other categories.
Right, for sure. Let's get off of the products for a minute. You've had the benefit of getting to fish all over the country and obviously fish with some of the top folks and some of the pros, that sort of thing. Let's talk about real quickly, like your top 3 to 5 fishing destinations, bass fishing spots, and then we're going to talk a little conservation because some of these spots I know have some issues going on right now.
GPS coordinates, if you don't mind.
I know some of his holes, Aaron. I really do. I've got a mark on my equipment.
Yeah, Cooksey and I have met up on a couple of offshore spots on Kentucky Lake in the past. Yeah, and what's funny is I actually have 4 spots on Kentucky Lake that I have the coordinates memorized. So no matter what boat I get in, I could literally get right on that rock or that stump. And one of them, one of my best friends, this is kind of funny, maybe kind of weird, but one of my best friends has the coordinates to this one spot that I've won. I mean, I don't know how to tell you how much money I've won or how many big bass I've caught, but when my time on this earth is through, that's where I want my ashes spread, is on this one particular spot. And he's got that coordinate in his gun safe.
Wow. In a safe.
Yep. I mean, he knows where it's at. I don't want the rest of the world to know where it's at.
No.
Until when I'm gone, you can all have it. But until then, we're keeping it in a gun safe. So
I don't blame you a bit. When you get away from Kentucky Lake, though, if you've got your pick, where are you going? Where are the best places to go? Where should we all be thinking?
Well, I'd like to approach that different if I can, Bill.
Okay. Let
me tell you where my favorite places ever are. And some of them aren't that way today, which is really in line with Kentucky Lake, right? First off, let me say this. You guys know this. Your listeners know this. This is no surprise, but it's worth stating. Everything in life is cyclical. I'd made this statement earlier, and I live and believe this. Everything in life is a series of seasons that you go through, and seasons change. And, fisheries and wildlife populations and everything, the health of them are cyclical. And so, my favorite places ever may not be the best today, but they're in some phase of that cycle, right? And so that may not be what you're asking, but if I could, I'd really like to answer that question with, this was my favorite place ever then, and here's where it is now. Can I do that?
Absolutely. Roll with it, man.
Okay, so this is the most homer answer ever, but Kentucky Lake would be number one. And I'm biased because I know it better than anywhere else. But 8 years ago, Kentucky Lake was the best lake in the country. I make that statement because despite the pressure, and it got plenty, if you had 5 bass in a fishing tournament and you had 23 to 24 pounds, you knew you were not going to win.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I was talking to a buddy of mine, Sam Lashley and I were talking the other day about how many times we would blast off the morning of a tournament and run 60 miles one way and run past 40 schools of 4-pounders that you could catch a 4-pounder on every cast, and we would not even stop on them because they were irrelevant at the end of the day. If you had a 4-pounder, you were beat. And just numbers and quality combined, Kentucky Lake, about 2014, 2015, I would put it up against anywhere. Not there today. We can talk a little more about that, as we get into this. But number 2 would be Falcon Lake in Zapata, Texas. Much like Kentucky Lake, I used to spend – I had a little brief stint, and I say brief because it got shut down by work and wife and lots of things. But I would – there was some years where I would spend 6 to 8 weeks of the year down there fishing. And it was phenomenal, much the same way Kentucky Lake was, but just bigger fish. Like I remember the first day I fished down there, my best 5 weighed about 27 pounds, and I fished about 3 hours. And I'd never seen the lake before. And I went to the tackle shop that evening, and the guy said, well, how did you do? And I said, man, I caught them really good. I said, I caught 8 5-pounders in 3 hours. And he goes, buddy, look, he goes, I can tell you fished a lot. He goes, I can tell you're going to do fine. He goes, but you need to understand the local term for a 5-pounder is a standard. That's what we call a 5-pounder is a standard. And he said, you didn't catch them very good. But I came to love that lake, and I've taken a bunch of friends down there, and I told them, if you'll give me 2 days, we'll catch you a 10-pounder.
Wow.
I needed two days. And just that lake in its prime was probably the best lake ever, aside from my bias to Kentucky Lake. Number 3, I'm going to say Lake St. Clair in Michigan. Just the sheer number of 4+ pound smallmouth you can catch on any day there. The wind is obviously the biggest factor. There's times where you literally just don't leave your hotel room, for a couple of days at a time because you just can't get out there. But I've never been anywhere where every time I put my boat in the water, I knew I was going to catch 100 fish, and St. Clair is that place.
Wow.
And then smallmouth too, to me, are just kind of have this mystique about them that, growing up in Tennessee, we had smallmouth and we had some big ones. But they're just different up there on the Great Lakes. Number 4 would be the California Delta. The most diverse fishery I've ever seen in my life. The number of giants, and by giants, I'm talking 10 pluses that come out of there, are higher than anywhere else on earth. And it is just such a neat place. You can go fish any way you want to fish on any given day. You can go crank and win. You can go flip and win. You can go throw topwater and win. You can go throw swim bait and win. I've seen bass in the Delta that undoubtedly were in the mid-teens.
Wow.
I've not caught one, but I've seen them in the water. I mean, I've caught plenty of, my personal best is 13.2. I've caught plenty of 10-pounders. I've seen some fish in the Delta that were undoubtedly 13, 14, 15 pounds. So that place is like Jurassic Park. It's just its own deal.
Pretty good duck hunting too, Crispin.
Yeah, it really is. One of the guys I fished with there one time, I've been to the Delta half a dozen times or so fishing. One of the guys I fished with there was a pretty avid waterfowl hunter, and I've hunted California. And it was kind of on one of my bucket lists to hunt, that Pacific Flyway, and I've hunted all up and down it now. But one of the guys I fished with one day as we were riding around was pointing out because they've got like duck clubs out there on the Delta, right, where they basically flood ag fields right off of the Delta.
Right.
And he was like, this is the Hilton Duck Club, and not like at home, we've had a blind called the Hilton in Springville Bottoms. This was actually owned by the Hilton family, right? Like it's
Baron Hilton. That was Venice Island.
Yep, that's right. And he rode me around one day when it was super hot and just showed me all kind of the duck where the duck layout was. But my last spot I want to tell you, favorite fishing destinations ever is not bass fishing. I I've only been once. I can't wait to go back. John Barnes, who was the previous owner of Strike King, took me and Doug and Mary and Phil Marks and a few other people up there, Alan Ranson, in 2020, and we went fly fishing in the Katmai National Park in Alaska.
Wow!
I have fly fished once in my life, and I'm talking about catching 10-pound rainbows. Like that, they have all told me, don't even bother going home and going to East Tennessee. Don't bother going to the Little Red River. Like my first rainbow trout, like, was hard to hold up with two hands. It's 10-pounder, and I will tell you that if things were different, and someday they may be, I could spend a whole lot of time chasing those things around. We stayed at this really incredible place called Enchanted Lake Lodge, and it's not for the faint of heart with your pocketbook, I'll tell you that. But we flew in and out every day on a float plane. I saw 50 grizzly bears a day, or Alaskan coastal brown bears is what they refer to them as there. They're salmon eaters. They're not worried about you. They're generational salmon eaters, and
right.
But one of the guides made a statement one day, and it really resonated in my soul. And I've told my wife, like, I'm going back. I may take you, I may take our kids, I may go alone, whatever that looks like, but I'm going back. But he made the statement, he goes, trout don't live in ugly places. And man, how right that is. I'll be honest with you. I joked with them all that, fly fishing is for like people that I envision having high tea and, I'm just this low class bass fisherman. Right. But man, there's really something special about it that I talked to you before I went. Matter of fact, I think you even offered to let me come down and you were going to give me some casting lessons. And I'm not a great fly caster, but I picked it up. I mean, I've had a rod and reel in my hand most of my life.
Right.
But man, I would be remiss to not have that in my top 5. It could be number 1. It really could be. Yes.
Howdy, listeners. For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
And for even more excellent content, here's a message from our partner podcast.
Hey everyone, this is Marcia Brownlee from Artemis Sportswomen. We know you love awesome stories about hunting, fishing, and conservation, so head on over to the Artemis podcast. You'll meet adventurous, accomplished women who are redefining conservation through their lives in the field and on the water. Filled with humor, audacity, empathy, and intelligence, Artemis brings you new voices and introduces you to women from all walks of the sporting community. Find Artemis wherever you get your podcasts.
That's a heck of a transition for talking about conservation and for a couple of different reasons. One, basically every place you said, and like all places out there that are good, sportsmen and places have conservation issues. And then two, we just had Brian Kraft on our last podcast, who owns a lodge on I won't even say the river name because every time I butcher it, but it's a river that comes out of the Bristol Bay area of Alaska. He was telling us about those same, 30-inch rainbows. Us trout fishermen usually don't say pounds. I like that little distinction between the bass fishermen and the trout fishermen. We usually say, 30-incher or whatever, but a nice big fat fish. And anyway, I was hoping we could take this moment to pivot a little and hear about some of the stuff that you're thinking about in the conservation space with bass fishing and, what's coming across your desk. And particularly, I'm curious if you can expand on this. How is the industry looking at this? Because, one of the things I always contend and say, or maybe not contend, but just talk about, like, so much of the outdoor industry relies specifically on having places to utilize their products, right? And so it's always cool when the outdoor industry gets engaged in that stuff and kind of throws their weight behind these conservation challenges. And there's a long history of doing that. And, Pittman Robertson's obviously a great example, Dingle Johnson, where the products are out there, but there's other, more specific examples. But tell us about your conservation realm right now.
Let me start off by saying I think you're dead on, Aaron, that like we have a responsibility to steward these resources to the best of our ability, and they deserve our best efforts. I think so many times people get in that consumer mindset versus being a contributor. And I think, in the bass fishing world, that's where I'm most well-versed. I think bass fishing as a whole did a really good job in the late 70s to really move to catch and release. Obviously, it was, a gigantic movement on behalf of the bass fishing world, catch and release tournaments, and even guys that aren't tournament anglers, they just ingrained the bass fishermen that catch and release was the way to preserve the resource and ensure that it thrived going forward. And so I feel like we've done a good job there. I feel like as modern advancements have come about, what does catch and release mean? Well, it's not throw them in a cooler or on a stringer. Now we've got, I'm a skeeter boat guy, and I know what they put into effort to make their live wells where a fish is protected and released in as good or better shape than they were caught in. There's tons of products on the market that help us do that, but also you're starting to see this shift to like this catch. I'm super ADHD, so I'm going to bounce around here for a second. But I tried my hand at the kayak bass fishing circuit one year, and I really decided I liked a trolling motor and an outboard. But one of the things that I really liked about kayak fishing is they call it CPR, catch, photo, and release, right? So you're not bringing fish back to weigh in. You catch them. They actually, Aaron, do them in inches too, which I still can't really wrap my head around, whether it's trout or bass or whatever it is. Man, we weigh things. But I'm only 6 foot tall, but I'm girthy, right? So I think inches don't tell the whole story sometimes.
Is that why you prefer the weight?
Yeah, I prefer weight, right? Because my wife's a good cook. And if you tell somebody I'm 6 foot tall, that just tells you one dimension. Weight tells the whole story. So but in the kayak world, you catch a bass, you lay him on a measuring board, take a picture, and he's back in the water in 15 seconds. And I really like that. I'm sure Bill's seen this from me. We were joking before we came on about, where we are in our age in terms of, patience and maturity. And I'm really getting better about kind of picking my battles on social media, but I have this little bit of fight in me from time to time, and it's just got to come out. And one of the things that I literally detest, matter of fact, I've made it it's an initiative within our company. I can't stand it when people catch fish and throw them in a live well and ride around all day just to take a picture with them and then throw them back. Like, that is just one of those huge ego things in my mind that, you're using the resource to stroke your ego and with little regard for it. So I say all that to say, I think you're going to see bass fishing go more and more towards maybe that MLF-ish format where you catch them, weigh them, and release them. From a spectator standpoint, I've heard, both sides of that coin, proponents of both. People like to see a 5-fish weigh-in. They really do, because we're old-fashioned. But I think for the sake of our resource and being good stewards of it, I think we've got to find ways to make it less about the entertainment value and more about why we're actually out there and what we're pursuing. And I think you'll see that transition into other areas of fishing as well. I think fly fishing has done a good job of that, with barbless areas and trophy areas, and, you can't fish in this area because it's a, spawning habitat or whatever. I really think as bass fishing progresses, you'll start to see some of those same things come into play. I mean, obviously, you may not know this, Aaron. Bill, I think, does, but I was in Michigan a couple weeks ago. I fished Traverse Bay for a couple days, and their smallmouth season had just opened. And you say that in Tennessee, and they're like, bass season. But what they've done is they've made a real concerted effort to make sure those, at least the majority of those fish get to spawn. And it's, we're learning everything. This is an evolution. We're, as mankind, I think you may not hear it on the news every day, but I think we have the opportunity to get better every day. And I think as professionals in the outdoor industry, I think that we have a lot of weight on our shoulders to lead that charge, and in whatever way that is. Maybe it's techniques that are better for our fish in terms of handling and tournaments, or maybe it's seasonality, or maybe it's you were talking non-lead options for rifles. Maybe that's the trend towards tungsten in the bass world these days versus lead. There's just so many opportunities there for us to do better, and I just think it's important that we strive for that, right?
Crispin, I want to hit you with something here because you and I both fish a lot of the same water. Matter of fact, you were talking 8 years ago. It was 9 years ago. You and I met on a ledge right after I'd gotten side imaging on my boat, and I was really trying to learn that stuff. And back then on Kentucky Lake, even I could at times go and have a 40 and 50 fish a day, day as a weekend hack. And that all ended. I mean, it happened in a hurry.
It did.
But last year you said, Bill, it's getting better. And I'm like, I don't think so. And at this point, I have to admit, it is. So talk a little bit about what happened and kind of the various things that came together to hurt it and where we are now.
Sure.
So it's good news.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, this is a very heated topic at home, right? And the thing is, I think it's human nature to want to point your finger at something and have a scapegoat for your problem. In my mind, there is no single scapegoat. There is no single problem, or no single cause of the problem. Now, the problem is obviously the demise of the fishery.
Sure.
We experienced what I've told many times is the perfect storm. We had a couple of years of epic floods. I mean, like on historic proportions. They called them 500-year floods, but we had them back-to-back years. Well, they just happened to they happened to come along right during the primary spawning season for our bass population. So imagine, like, I'm looking at the beach right now and all those people out there enjoying all that sand and close proximity to others that I don't enjoy. But if you were to take 2 generations of people out of what I'm looking at right now, it would vastly change what I see. So right off the top, we took 2 generations out of our bass population. Those spawns didn't happen. Number 2, about the same time, and look, I'm not a huge conspiracy theorist. I'm much more simple than that. But all the grass on the lake from dam to dam disappeared. How, why? I can't tell you. I have a theory. I'm not going to go into it. Everybody has a theory. The fact of the matter is it disappeared. When aquatic vegetation becomes absent in a fishery, everything suffers. Your bait fish will become depleted because they have no cover, no protection. from predatory fish. And then those predatory fish will become depleted because, let's be honest, there was about a year there after the grass went away that I could go down a bar with my Humminbird side scan, and I could see every bass out there because there was nothing for them to hide in. And
Right.
so your maturity level, those bass couldn't hide from other predators, and they couldn't. I mean, we caught them all, and I take part in that. We caught them all. The most popular scapegoat for the downturn of the fishery on Kentucky Lake is the Asian carp. The way I understand it is these were pretty much brought in and used in catfish ponds along the banks of the Mississippi for various reasons to control the spread of aquatic vegetation where it wasn't desirable. And when the Mississippi would flood, these carp would get into it. That makes its way. They made their way up into the Ohio, made their way through the lock and dam on Kentucky Lake, and they became prolific. And when I say prolific, I mean prolific. You could go scan all day and see 5 million carp.
Yeah.
And the problem with the carp is that they eat phytoplankton. That's what they do. They're filter feeders. You'll occasionally catch one in the mouth with a lure, and people go, "You can't tell me they're not eating bass." Well, I'm telling you, they're not eating bass. Might they slurp up a bass fry from time to time as they did my lure? Absolutely. I would say that is an astronomically low percentage of bass that get, come to their demise by being preyed upon by Asian carp that don't eat bass. But the problem is they do eat phytoplankton. That is their source of nutrients. Nutrition, and so do the baitfish population. And a 4-inch gizzard shad can't compete with a 4-foot carp. I did go length there instead of weight, for the record, Aaron. But
appreciate that.
The shad had no chance competing with the carp for what they both have as a food source. So the baitfish population declined. And to me, that was the greatest impact the carp had on the fishery, was they competed with baitfish for the same food source and caused the decline of that baitfish population. And our bass on Kentucky Lake are shad eaters. That's what they are. They eat crawfish, they eat whatever, but they're shad eaters primarily. The last part of the equation, Bill, is the one that's not popular. It's the one that I get some people pretty riled up about, and quite honestly, in my line of work, shouldn't be the one that I am willing to plant my flag and it be my hill to die on. But I'm going to go out there because I believe it's worthwhile. The lake just got too much pressure.
Amen.
The lake hosted a Bassmaster event, hosted at the time an FLW event. It would have an Everstart event at the time. It would have a Bass Open. Boat
owners.
Yeah, all the boat owners came there because it's a big lake. It's 168 miles from dam to dam. It's gigantic. Problem is, all the fish were in about half of that. And that's where everybody spent all their time. And they would go out and it's a ledge fishery primarily, right? That's when they had all those big tournaments there, is when those fish were grouped up in schools offshore and you could just go catch them at will. And then you haul them around in your live well all day when it's 100 degrees. And you know what? I get that biologists say that lake can handle each of us taking 5 fish out a day. I just don't think they factored in the pressure that lake received at that point in time. And add in your high school tournaments, add in your college tournaments, add in your little Wildcat and Jackpot tournaments, add in your Bass Club tournaments, add in your night tournaments. Like, it was a relentless assault on that fish population. And it by itself didn't cause the demise. The carp by themselves didn't cause the demise. The grass absence didn't cause the demise. The floods didn't, but boy, it sure could not withstand all of those at one time. Now, the lake got bad. It got, this, being a local, it got bad. I mean, it got to where, like, my little boy is 9, Fisher. It's funny that I named him Fisher because, like, I can't even get him to go out fishing now because most of his life has been during this time when the fishing's been terrible. When he was 3 years old, that kid every evening, 2 to 3 years old, and I say every because it was that good. We would go every evening and I would let him reel in 30 4-pounders. I'd throw out there, set the hook, hand him the rod. I've got the cutest little videos of this little blonde-haired boy reeling in 4-pounders when he was 2.5 years old. I mean, he'd reeled in more 4-pounders by the age of 3.5 than a lot of grown men had. And I can't even get him to go now because he's like, man, we don't ever catch anything.
Right.
But let me transition.
But it's going the other way now,
That's
right?
That's where I want to go. This past winter, I like to fish in the winter because there's nobody out there. And our duck season's been pretty tough at home. So I've gotten back into bass fishing in the wintertime, and I like to crappie fish also. So I spent a lot of time out there, and last winter there was a lot of guys catching them and weren't talking about it. And I think I shared it with you, and I share it with the people I'm close with, but I'm not on Facebook telling everybody, man, it's back, because I've seen what happens when you do that, right? Now, the local economy needs people to know that, but the truth of the matter is that from a selfish standpoint, I wish not everybody knew that. No, it's not back where it was, not by any means, but the last time I was on the lake, I had 5, I'm an old bass fisherman. I weigh best 5, and I'm not weighing them. I'm guessing, but I feel I'm close.
Sure.
My best 5 was probably 17, 18 pounds, and I probably caught, another dozen and a half keepers to, 12 inches to 15 inches, not all keepers, but it's encouraging to see those year classes showing up now. Because I remember after the floods and after the introduction of the carp and all that, you could go out and just absolutely pound the big fish, but you weren't seeing those little ones. And now,
yep,
I think those little ones are really a good sign of the health of your fishery, right?
For sure. And I mean, same thing with crappie in that area.
Yep.
So, we're coming down to the end here, and I just wanted to ask you, looking at the industry and the future of bass fishing, hit us with some words of wisdom and something positive on the future.
Well, I would say this. Obviously, we as humans all across the globe have dealt with, COVID and some unprecedented things in our lifetime the past few years. I feel like one of the best things that came out of that is how many people, you couldn't go to the ballpark, you couldn't go to the movies, weren't going on a lot of vacations, weren't flying. I feel like a lot of people that maybe grew up like I did, where fishing wasn't something that you did. It was not something that, was a big part of your family life or what you did together. I feel like that a lot of people got to experience that during this time where I feel like, I think the number I heard was that, there was like 10 million new entrants overall into fishing in the United States. And coming out of that, guys, I think there's a lot in my lifetime, and I don't want to like wax poetic here, but I've had so many memories from childhood with a rod and reel in my hand and what might seem like an inconsequential fish, a little fish I caught in a farm pond or caught in a creek or a river, but I learned something, and there's just something that changes you, I believe, when you experience these times outdoors. And I think that a lot of a lot of parents and a lot of kids got to experience that when they wouldn't have otherwise. And I feel like they may be back at the ballpark this year. They may be back at, movie theaters on a Friday night or Saturday afternoon now because things have somewhat normalized. But once that gets planted in you, I just don't think it's going to go away. And I think it's going to ensure that people get that opportunity to experience life beyond the bounds of city life and, what really is out there for us to enjoy in nature. And I believe the more people that do that, the more people will contribute to that, and more people will share that with others and become involved and want to care for that resource. My upside right now about the future of this industry is I believe we live in a time where more people have experienced it than ever before now. And that's awesome to me. I mean, I see kids now that, time's changing. I'm getting old, but like I see these kids now that don't look like your typical fisherman kids, right? That are running around with their little flat bill hats and all that stuff. But man, they're excited to go fishing. Technology has made that, YouTube and social media and just, media as a whole has enabled this younger generation now to have access to this, that they're excited about it. And it's just super cool to me. I mean, look, times are changing. There's some things that come with that I don't love, but I refuse to be that old man yelling at the clouds. I'm just going to embrace it and be glad to see these youngsters getting involved. And one of my things I tell people all the time, if you have the privilege of enjoying the outdoors, you owe it to somebody else to share that with them. And I think we're in a time and place where that's probably happened more in the last couple of years than we realize.
Can I use this moment to get on my normal soapbox a little bit, Bill?
I was hoping you would.
Because Crispin, you just said some things that, I mean, they echo a lot of what I try to say. And I think the thing I would add to what you said is with that privilege, right, comes the obligation. Like we in our country, we're so lucky to have these amazing fish and wildlife resources, right? That like, if we do have a pandemic, I mean, imagine being a person that lives in a city and can't leave, and you can't go to a pond or a lake or a stream or out hunting, and most of our country does have the opportunity to get someplace fairly quick. Luckily, even if it's not the greatest in the whole world, it's still something, right? And that's something we just can't take for granted. And with that privilege, the obligation of conservation, take care of those resources. Everybody's got a lot of things they got to take care of right now. The world's a complicated place, but we're so lucky to have it. And, we'll know damn well that we needed to take care of it if it's gone, and we can't let that happen. So just thanks for what Amen. You're doing, and thanks for your getting folks out too. I mean, you're right. Get young people out. We need more connection to the natural world, and that's a good way to do it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more, Aaron. I've got a couple kids in my neighborhood who, I tell their parents I'm gonna file them on my taxes one of these days because they're at my house so much. But they come from families that are like mine, that don't hunt or fish. And I've got one of my son's best friends shot his first deer with me. He wanted to go. It was a youth hunt, and I had taken Fisher, and he wanted to go with us. And he got an opportunity. Fisher shot a buck, and there was a doe standing out there. Not one of those old mature does that we all cuss about, but one of those young does that really didn't understand what just happened. And he's like, well, I thought I was going to get to shoot. And I'm like, come here, buddy. And we got him pointed out the window. And, but it would have been super. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I could do 1,000 times better than I do. But in this instance, it would have been super easy for me to just focus on taking my son and just, making this about him. But I remembered that time when that man took me, when he could have just went and done what he wanted to do. And because of that, that young man, every time I talk to him, he talks to me about that day where he shot that deer, and he can't wait till he's big enough to go deer hunting now. And, it's just, it really boils down to caring enough about others to give them the same opportunities you've been given, at least to some degree. And so, Aaron, I love what you said, man. And I believe it's our responsibility.
Well, thanks, man. Bill, you want to take us away, or I know we're coming down to the end here, and just thank you, Crispin. I'll let Bill sign us off, but thank you. Good to see your face, and I know we'll be talking more in the future. Be well, brother.
Yeah, my pleasure. Great talking to you again, Aaron. And man, I love what you guys are doing. If I can ever, be part of it in any way, I'm glad to.
Well, Crispin, thanks for always being there for us. We really appreciate you and the folks at GSM. Hopefully we can get y'all back on come hunting season to talk about some things over on that side of the business and also that part of our natural world. And, thanks for being here. And for Aaron, this is Bill Cooksey thanking y'all for being with NWF Outdoors.
Take care, all. For more great content, check out NWF Outdoors social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Connect with us. We want to hear from you. Send us your ideas for podcast guests and questions in the comments.
We are NWF Outdoors.